Undercover boss orders breakfast at brunch spot learns the secret to ending hunger with one simple change. Morning at Foster's Brunch Cafe began like every other day. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee mingled with the smell of melting butter on steaming pancakes, spreading throughout the space, gently touching every sense like the sweetest invitation. A soft yellow light shone down on the pastry counter, casting a warm glow over the trays of pastries and muffins, as if the entire cafe was enveloped in a tender morning embrace. Customers trickled in each step, blending with the familiar chime of the POS bell. Some carried laptops, others clutched stacks of documents as they hurriedly ordered a latte before work. Some leaned back in brown leather chairs, holding steaming coffee cups, eyes gazing distantly out the large glass window. All of it formed a vivid painting that Michael Foster had spent his entire youth creating. He sat in the corner of the cafe, where the yellow light was just enough for him to observe without drawing attention. His old, slightly frayed cap and worn gray coat made it easy for him to blend in with the crowd of strangers. Michael Foster, founder of Foster's Coffee House, now disguised himself as an ordinary customer, quietly sipping a latte, his eyes silently observing every corner of the cafe he once carefully arranged. He looked around, his gaze resting on the pastry counter. The golden pancakes were neatly stacked with melting butter, making them look irresistible. Back when Foster's Brunch Cafe first opened, he had personally tested dozens of recipes to find the perfect flavor that would turn heads. In those days, his staff's eyes always shone with pride whenever customers complimented the delicious pastries and rich coffee. Everything back then was simple but warm, just like the very first days he started building Foster's Coffee House. Now everything still looked the same, at least on the surface. The light was still warm and yellow, the pancakes still golden, the coffee still steaming, but Michael felt something had changed. The sweetness in the air now carried a different scent, the tiredness of long, endless shifts, the anxiety in the eyes that darted toward the POS counter. Michael saw Anna, the young waitress, walking briskly toward him. She carried a tray of steaming pancakes and a latte that was still smoking. The warm light from the ceiling caught the soft brown hair that fell loosely around her face. Her eyes, once bright like stars, now held a different light, the light of someone who had learned to hide her exhaustion behind a warm smile. Michael leaned back slightly, gently turning the latte cup in his hand. A strange feeling rose within him at once, familiar and distant, as if he were standing outside his own brainchild. Anna set the plate of pancakes on the table, her hand trembling slightly, a bead of sweat glistening on her forehead under the light. She looked up at him, just an ordinary customer, but in her eyes, Michael saw an entire untold story. It was the look of mornings that started before the alarm clock, of shifts stretching from dawn to dusk, of nights, counting every last tip to see if tomorrow's meal would be enough. She smiled, her lips pressing together as if to hide something, then quietly said, her voice trembling but honest, filled with a deep yearning to be heard, "All we need is fair tip sharing, then everyone could afford to eat every day." Michael froze, his heart skipping a beat. A sentence that seemed so ordinary, just a casual confession. A sigh, yet to him, it felt like a knife plunged straight into his heart. He had once been proud that Foster's Coffee House and Foster's Brunch Cafe were second homes to every employee. He believed that every staff member who walked through those doors would be treated fairly, would share in the fruits of their labor, and would wear a satisfied smile as they split every last tip at the end of the day. Yet now it was that very young waitress, the girl he had believed would have a solid place under this roof, who spoke those words. So light like a breath, but so heavy with meaning. All we need is fair tip sharing. He gently tightened his grip on the latte cup. His eyes lingered on Anna for a long moment, as if searching for something he had lost along the very path he had built. The dream of Foster's, the dream of a cafe home where everyone had the right to be respected and to share, was now shaking. Anna walked away, her small figure blending into the stream of hurried customers. Michael watched her, his heart heavy. That sentence, just one sentence, had awakened a part of his memory. He had tried to forget those long nights poring over ledgers, the clear breakdowns of tips, the eyes of staff that once sparkled with trust. Now that dream seemed warped, reduced to mere reports and numbers on the POS system. And he himself, the founder, the man who laid the foundation of Foster's Brunch Cafe, hadn't seen it until Anna stood before him, speaking those words with eyes that glistened with hope, but also a tinge of fatigue. Michael leaned back and took a sip of his now cold latte, his gaze fixed on the POS terminal, glowing blue like a silent sentinel. At that moment, he knew he could no longer turn his back. From that one small sentence, he realized that Foster's Brunch Cafe needed saving by his own hands. Foster's Brunch Cafe never seemed to get any less busy on early mornings. The line of customers wound toward the pastry counter, phones in hand, checking emails or ordering steaming coffee to start the day. The soft yellow light shone down on trays of muffins on warm pancakes, still steaming, spreading the aroma of butter and vanilla into the air, heavy with the scent of freshly roasted coffee. Everything seemed to remain the same, like the image of a coffee empire that Michael Foster had once built up day by day, with the belief that this place would be a second home to the people who had walked with him through so many hard days. Michael Foster, 50 years old, with hair touched by the frost of time, sat in the corner of the cafe, his eyes quietly observing the familiar, yet somehow now an unfamiliar scene. His old cap was slightly askew on his head, and his gray wool coat was worn at the elbows, blending him into the crowd like a nameless guest. But inside his heart still beat the rhythm of a founder, the man who had once stood behind the bar, pouring lattes, who had spent countless sleepless nights wrestling with the puzzle of fair tip sharing so that everyone could see the value of their sweat. He had once been proud of Foster's Brunch Cafe, his brainchild, that he had hoped would become a place of sharing where the warm yellow light would not just illuminate the pastries, but warm the hearts of those struggling amid the grind of survival. Yet now, sitting in a familiar corner of the cafe, he saw the tired lines etched on his staff's foreheads behind the polite smiles, were eyes tinged with a sadness he could not name. In another corner of the pastry counter, Anna was busy arranging freshly baked pancakes onto a tray. That small girl, just in her 20s, had her brown hair tied up neatly, exposing her slender neck with a few damp strands clinging to it. Her cream apron was frayed at the bottom edges, a testament to countless long shifts. Her eyes followed each pancake on the tray, as if each one was a piece of her life. Michael remembered the first time he met Anna. Back then, she was a fresh graduate, her clear eyes shining with enthusiasm and a hunger to learn. In her eyes then, Foster's Brunch Cafe wasn't just a workplace, it was a home, a dream of kindness and fairness that she had heard Michael speak of during her first training. That look had renewed his faith in the values he was building. Now Anna was still diligent, still smiling when customers ordered, but Michael could see behind that smile were countless weary nights, endless early and late shifts with tips growing ever scarcer. That girl who once took pride in Foster's was now learning to swallow her tears, turning them into a tired smile to keep working. The POS beeped steadily at the barista counter like the heartbeat of a giant machine. Michael looked at the young barista with slick-back brown hair smirking after every tip transaction. The young man's eyes glanced at Anna as if she were an extra cog in the system he was manipulating. In that moment, Michael felt that Foster's Brunch Cafe, the place he once believed to be a home of fairness, was fracturing. Behind the pastry counter, Anna diligently wiped down the shelves, her hands trembling, yet her smile still on her lips. A regular customer called to her, and she hurried over, her smile unchanged, but her eyes briefly revealed a flicker of sadness that made Michael's heart ache. He understood behind those eyes were so many unspoken thoughts, so many injustices that hadn't yet found a voice. Michael recalled the recent revenue reports, declining sales, more staff resignations. He had thought it was just the result of a fiercely competitive coffee market or the general economic downturn. But today, with just one small sentence from Anna, Michael realized that behind those cold numbers was a long story of people fighting to keep their dreams alive. All we need is fair tip sharing, then everyone could afford to eat every day. That sentence still echoed in Michael's head, aching like a sad note. Foster's Brunch Cafe, the place he once believed was a second home for everyone, was now becoming an underground battlefield, where those he trusted most were forced to scramble for every last tip. Michael's heart clenched. The yellow light still shone over the pancake trays on the tiled floor on Anna's weary hair. But in that light, he saw another light, the light of trust that had been betrayed. And he knew he couldn't sit still any longer. Michael Foster gently tightened his grip around the still steaming latte cup, his eyes quietly scanning the barista counter. The warm yellow light of Foster's Brunch Cafe illuminated the row of gleaming coffee machines, casting glistening highlights like drops of golden honey. But under that soft glow, Michael noticed fine cracks he had never seen before, fissures slowly destroying the very Foster's Brunch Cafe he had once poured his heart into the building. He began to observe more carefully every glance, every stance, every whispered conversation among the staff behind the barista counter. The young team, with their crisp uniforms and confident smiles, once the soul of Foster's Brunch Cafe in Michael's eyes, now looked like lead actors in a play where the audience had just realized they were being deceived. Those faces always appeared during peak hours when the customer line stretched long, when the POS machine beeped relentlessly like a triumphant tune. Tips flowed in like rain, and the barista's eyes sparkled like stage lights. The young barista with light brown hair, a confident smile, and a perfect posture held the pastry tray with a flourish as if he owned the entire cafe. Meanwhile, in the pastry corner, Anna, the petite girl with her brown hair tied back, stood silently like a shadow. Her eyes were lowered to the dark oak countertop, her trembling hands wiping the dried coffee stain over and over. Each wipe was like an invisible apology for the things she couldn't say. Her thin shoulders and the cream apron, now faded at the bottom hem, testified to countless exhausting nights. Michael sighed softly, his eyes resting on the shift schedule posted beside the barista counter. On that crisp white paper, the printed names stood out clearly, the familiar ones assigned to the golden hours, 7:00 a.m. to 10:00 a.m., the busiest time when customers lined up the longest. Tips, during those peak hours, were always the most abundant. The very tips Michael once thought would brighten his employees' eyes. But now it had become a weapon for the trusted baristas to claim what should have belonged to everyone. Anna and a few others, those rare names scheduled during the off hours, started their shifts when customers had already thinned out, when the morning rush had faded, when the POS machine beeped only occasionally like the last drops of coffee from the pot. Tips were so scarce they couldn't even buy a decent lunch, let alone save enough to get through the day. Michael swallowed hard, his eyes scanning every corner of the barista counter. The POS, the system he had once proudly hailed as transparent and fair, now glowed coldly blue. Its light reflected on the glass like a mocking smile. He squinted, looking closely, instead of splitting tips per transaction, as he had originally designed the POS system, has been adjusted. Now all tips were pooled into a single account and then redistributed at the discretion of the manager, the very one. Michael's eyes now caught glancing sideways at the favored baristas, his lips curling into a half smile. His heart clenched. This very place, Foster's Brunch Cafe, had once been his cherished brainchild, the place where he had spent countless nights closing the books, fine-tuning the POS, to ensure everyone got their fair share of tips. Now that lifeless machine he had once seen as a symbol of transparency had become a tool for the cunning to siphon off the sweat of people like Anna. Michael turned his gaze back to Anna. She still stood silently, her eyes lowered like a fading star. Behind the pastry counter, she gently brushed her hair back, then gripped her apron lightly as if to find a fragile comfort. In the soft yellow light, he could clearly see the calluses on her fingers, marks of countless long shifts, days of waiting for customers, nights spent cleaning tables, wiping down espresso machines. Michael's heart tightened. Did I let this happen? The question echoed painfully in his mind. The yellow light on the cafe's ceiling still cast its glow, sweet but now appearing like a deceptive sheen. Foster's Brunch Cafe, the place he had once believed was a home of sharing, was turning into a stage for under-the-table deals, where the vulnerable, like Anna, could only grit their teeth and endure. Michael tightened his grip around the now-cold latte cup. In the blue glow of the pause, he saw the reflection of his own eyes, the eyes of a founder, standing at the boundary between trust and betrayal. And he knew it was time he could no longer sit still. Michael took a long breath, the now-cold coffee carrying a bitter scent of truth. His gaze shifted from the cup in his hand, sweeping over the pale blue-lit POS screen before resting on the row of staff lined up behind the barista counter. Each of them was busy with their usual tasks, making coffee, preparing pastries, wiping tables. But Michael noticed something different, something intangible, that the warm yellow light couldn't hide. A young girl with a cream apron, her small frame carefully placing each muffin onto a freshly baked tray. Her hand trembled slightly, her eyes darted quickly to the POS and then away. Michael noticed that each time she carried a new item to the counter, her eyes seemed to carry a message, a wariness, a quiet fear toward Anna standing in the pastry corner. A fleeting spark passed through her eyes when she met Michael's gaze, then vanished like a candle snuffed by a gust of wind. The POS beeped again, ringing like an alarm in his heart. Michael saw clearly the young barista with light brown hair, skillfully tapping on the POS, entering tips, while casting a glance at the shift manager, a look of implicit agreement. The manager nodded subtly enough for Michael to understand everything had been prearranged. Almost by instinct, Michael turned his gaze to the shift schedule, pinned to the left wall of the pastry counter. The schedule was just a simple A4 sheet, but the text was neatly aligned. Each employee's name is placed carefully like a solved math problem. But hidden beneath that orderliness, he saw the carefully orchestrated injustice. Anna's name, along with a few others, was pinned to the low traffic hours when customers were few and tips scarce. Meanwhile, the familiar names of the trusted barista group were assigned to the golden shifts, reaping tips like a bountiful harvest. Michael shivered slightly. The POS system he had once trusted as a shield of transparency had now been turned into a tool of manipulation. He remembered those nights spent alone with his old laptop, meticulously writing every line of the tip-sharing protocol, designing the POS so that everyone would receive their fair share according to their efforts. He had once believed that if he did things right, Foster's Brunch Cafe would become a symbol of fairness. Now the yellow light still shone on the cold blue glow of the POS. An inanimate light, but under the hands of the greedy, it had become a weapon that robbed the sweat of Anna and those like her. Behind the pastry counter, Anna still stood silently. Michael noticed her hand trembling slightly as she arranged pancakes onto a plate. Every time a customer ordered, she bowed her head politely saying, "Yes, I'll serve it right away." But after that line, her eyes seemed like a lake, disturbed by ripples, hidden waves of emotions that had never been voiced. Suddenly, a young customer approached the barista counter, holding a tiny receipt, his face slightly tense. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Where's my tip? I want to make sure it goes to the right person." Michael's heart jolted. He knew that Foster's Brunch Cafe had a policy allowing customers to add tips directly when paying at the POS, and that those tips were supposed to go straight to the designated server. But with everything he just witnessed, he knew that was no longer guaranteed. The young barista with light brown hair, the one who had previously smirked at the POS, swiftly grabbed the receipt and gave a slight smile. "Ah, the POS system had a small glitch. Don't worry, we've taken care of it." Michael felt anger rising in his throat. A glitch, he thought. The POS system I designed, the one I trusted, has now become a cover for deception. Michael's eyes returned to Anna. She looked at the young customer with a mix of gratitude and surprise, as if she had never seen a customer inquire about tips before. But then her shoulders drooped again, and she lightly gripped the edge of the pastry tray, as if bracing herself for something. He sighed. In that moment, Michael realized the Foster's Brunch Cafe. He had once dreamed of a place where the warm yellow light illuminated the honest sweat of his staff, was now being manipulated by cunning schemes with Anna as the victim of it all. A painful question resurfaced like a clock's hand turning backward. How did I let it get this way? Michael gently tightened his grip on the latte cup, now only faintly warm. The last drop of coffee pooled at the bottom of the cup, reflecting the yellow light like a withered tear. He knew it was time to stop sitting still. Foster's Brunch Cafe needed to be saved. Anna needed to be saved. And he had to be the one to bring everything back to the values he once believed in. Michael sat silently in the corner of the cafe. His coffee was now cold, his eyes following every movement behind the barista counter. Each yellow light beam reflected off the shiny steel of the pastry counter and the espresso machine like deceptive stripes of light, both familiar and foreign. In that light, Michael clearly saw the young barista with light brown hair. His face still wore that arrogant smile, his fingers dancing across the POS screen like an artist performing a song of injustice. He had just finished checking the morning shift's tips, his eyes flicking toward Anna, then unexpectedly curled his lips into a sneer, a smile full of challenge as if silently declaring to Anna, "These tips are ours." In that moment, Michael felt his heart squeeze painfully. He had once believed that Foster's Brunch Cafe was a place where every employee had the right to share in the fruits of their labor, that those small tips symbolized fairness, a reward worthy of every drop of sweat spilled behind the bar. But now the young barista's eyes had turned that dream to ashes. Michael remembered the early days when this cafe was still small. He personally split every single tip and arranged every shift so that everything was fair. Back then, his employees' eyes lit up like stars, the light of trust and pride. That light had now vanished. Instead, there were eyes cast downward, averted glances, and eyes that gleamed with calculation behind the POS. He looked for Anna. She was standing behind the pastry counter, quiet like a shadow. The yellow light illuminated her hands as she arranged pancakes on the tray. Every time she moved her hand, Michael could clearly see the calluses on her fingers, marks from long shifts, nights of cleaning tables, wiping down espresso machines, the smell of butter lingering in her hair each night she went home. Suddenly, Anna lowered her head over the counter, and her hand secretly slipped out an old notebook. Its corners frayed the pages, slightly warped, as if they had been wet. Michael held his breath, his eyes widening to watch. Anna flipped through the pages, a small pen trembling in her hand. She scribbled something quickly messy, writing that Michael couldn't quite read from afar, but he knew it wasn't just a list of pastries or notes on customer orders. A brief breeze blew through the large glass door, flipping Anna's notebook to another page. Michael only caught a glimpse of a few short lines: tips adjusted, unfair shift assignments, threatening messages from management. His heart clenched as if gripped by a tight fist. Anna, the small girl he had once believed would find a home at Foster's Brunch Cafe, was now forced to fight an entire system of fraud all on her own. Those short lines were like needles piercing through Michael's memories. He remembered all the times he sat in the small office, meticulously reviewing shift reports, checking tips to ensure everyone was paid fairly. The staff meetings where everyone's eyes shone every time fair tip sharing was mentioned. Now Foster's Brunch Cafe still glowed with its yellow light, still bustled with customers coming and going, but Anna's eyes no longer carried that same light as before. The POS machine glowed again, its reflection shimmering on the glass. The young barista still stood there, his eyes sparkling with triumph after each tap on the screen. Michael clearly heard a soft laugh exchange between him and the barista supervisor. A small sound, but enough for him to understand that everything had been carefully arranged in advance. Michael gripped the latte cup tightly, its lukewarm coffee as tasteless as the lifeless numbers on the revenue report. In the yellow light, he saw Anna's hands trembling as she flipped through her notebook, her eyes darting around nervously as if afraid of being caught. She was recording everything on her own, like a personal indictment to be used on the day she was strong enough to speak up. In Michael's heart rose a painful question: how did I let this happen? His gaze swept over to the young barista, his eyes piercing like a spear into a wound in his still-healing heart. Foster's Brunch Cafe, the brainchild he had painstakingly built to be a place where everyone shared the joy, was now being exploited by the very people he had once trusted, turning it into a machine that drained the sweat and tears of vulnerable people like Anna. He knew that nothing would change if he didn't do something, and in that moment, Anna's trembling eyes made him realize it was time for Michael Foster to stand up, not just for that small girl, but for the very ideals he had once sworn to protect. Michael held his breath, his eyes following the young barista with light brown hair as he left the POS station and returned to the pastry counter. The young man nonchalantly grabbed a napkin and wiped the stainless steel counter as if finishing a simple cleaning routine. But the glance he threw at Anna was like a scratch on the glass, leaving a painful mark in Michael's heart. A cold, condescending look as if he was saying, "Everyone here knows the game and you're no exception." Michael noticed him wink at another coworker, a girl with a red headband and light-colored highlights in her hair. Then they exchanged glances like an unspoken agreement, as if well-versed in the game of manipulating tips. The girl's hand moved deftly over the POS screen, the blue light reflecting off her thin glasses, and she let out a soft laugh. "Tips are still good, right?" The young barista replied with a slight nod, and they both turned to the corner of the counter, continuing their work with the confident posture of those who controlled the game. Michael turned away, his heart aching. From behind the pastry counter, Anna continued working, seemingly oblivious to the eyes that watched her every move. Her hand trembled slightly as she packed the pancakes into a paper box, her eyes darting quickly to the POS, as if to make sure everything was still correct. But that glance quickly disappeared like a star fading away. A customer stood at the barista counter, his voice slightly worried. "I already added a tip, but I don't see it on the bill." The young barista smiled slightly, his voice smooth like butter, his eyes glistening. Let me double-check that for you. Our POS system is a bit special. It sometimes pools tips to distribute later. Don't worry, we share it with the right person." Michael felt his blood rush to his face. "The right person," he repeated to himself like a haunting question. The yellow light shone on Anna's calloused hands. She quietly placed the pastry box on the shelf, forcing a smile for the customer. Her eyes met Michael's for a brief second, then quickly looked away. Michael saw that look clearly, the look of someone who had lived through too many long days, where fairness was the most distant dream she could hope for. Outside the cafe, the morning light streamed through the glass window, painting a honey-colored halo on the tiled floor. Michael saw that light cast onto the shift schedule on the wall, names arranged in shifts like numbers in a solved equation. He realized he had ignored it for too long. Those lifeless letters had become a weapon for the insiders to divide power. A soft laugh came from the group of baristas. The young barista and the girl with the red headband whispered something and then burst into laughter. That sound struck Michael's heart like a knife, the sound of those mocking the very dream he once lit. He wondered, how long have they held the power, and why did I let myself be blinded? Michael closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the smell of cold stale coffee, a final punctuation mark for the trust he once had. When he first opened the cafe, he had sat beside the old POS machine, painstakingly entering every line of code, to ensure tips went to the right person. Now that same POS system had become a tool for the cunning to divvy up the spoils like loot. He opened his eyes and saw Anna clutching her old notebook. She quietly opened it to another page, quickly wrote something, then gently closed it. Her hand trembled slightly, her eyes revealed fear, but in that gaze, Michael saw a faint light determination, the belief that justice still existed even if only in a few lines of notes she was hiding. Michael knew she was alone in her fight. In Foster's Brunch Cafe, with its familiar yellow lights, the steady beep-beep of the POS machine, and the scent of pancakes and freshly brewed coffee, had now become a battlefield. A battlefield where if he didn't stand up, every value he had once built would come crumbling down, leaving nothing but stolen tips in the triumphant eyes of that barista group. He set his latte cup on the table, his gaze fixed firmly on the POS counter. In that moment, Michael Foster knew it was time for him to step out of the shadows, to push through every hesitation and protect the most sacred thing of all, the fairness upon which Foster's Brunch Cafe had once been built. Michael stood up the wooden chair, letting out a small creak, as if in response to his sudden resolve. The atmosphere in Foster's Brunch Cafe seemed to tighten, pausing amidst the sounds of the espresso machine spoons tapping against cups and the soft sighs of customers. The yellow light shone on Michael's salt and pepper hair, casting his shadow on the tiled floor, like a giant standing in the midst of his own dream. A dream he had once believed this golden light would forever symbolize trust and fairness. But today that light had become a witness to a confrontation he knew he could no longer avoid. Michael took a deep breath, his eyes sweeping across the entire cafe. His gaze stopped at the barista counter, where the young barista with light brown hair was standing holding a tray of pastries, that arrogant smile still lingering on his lips. Beside him, the POS glowed blue, its light reflecting on the glass, casting the lowered eyes of the manager, eyes trembling, as if realizing that the hour of reckoning had come. Michael's voice rang out warm but firm, every word is like a hammer blow echoing across the cafe. This is your sweat and effort stolen by the very people who were supposed to protect it. A silence descended, sucking the noise from the air. Customers stopped sipping their coffee fingers, paused on their phones, eyes turning to the middle-aged man standing there like a general leading an army. Anna stood frozen behind the pastry counter, still holding the pancake tongs. Her breath caught tears welling in her eyes, but they sparkled brightly in that instant. Michael took a step forward, his eyes locked on the blue-lit POS screen. That light, the light he had once believed was the symbol of transparency, had now become a symbol of betrayal. He saw in its reflection his own image, a founder who had once left a loophole that cunning people had turned into a trap to turn Anna's sweat and that of so many others into their spoils. He clenched his fists, his voice rising again stronger, this time an irrefutable declaration. From today on, every single tip will go to the person who truly deserves it. The entire cafe fell completely silent. No more espresso machine, no more beep from the POS like a fake victory tune. Everything seemed to pause, dedicating that moment to a truth just spoken, a truth that so many had once longed for. Michael clearly saw the young barista, with light brown hair, freeze his hand, gripping the pastry tray so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The barista manager, the one he had once trusted, bowed his head, shoulders trembling. The blue light from the POS reflected on the glass, highlighting each bead of sweat rolling down his forehead. Anna stood frozen behind the pastry counter, the pancake tongs in her hand falling onto the stainless steel counter with a faint clink that sounded like the bell signaling the end of an old chapter. A sparkling tear rolled down her cheek, catching the yellow light like a crystal tear, the tear of justice, of hope. Michael turned his gaze, sweeping across every staff member. Eyes widened, some with surprise, some with fear, some with gratitude, but they all shared one thing in common, the light of a rekindled belief. He turned toward the POS counter, his hand gently resting on the cold glass surface. In the dim blue light, he saw Anna's reflection, the girl who hadn't given up hope, who had bravely documented every injustice, even though it might cost her her job. In that moment, Michael felt he owed her an apology, a promise, and an action. His voice dropped, but each word still rang clear. I, Michael Foster, apologize for letting things get to this point, but today I'm here to make it right. A sigh came from a corner of the cafe, and a young staff member released their hand from the POS eyes, looking freed. The barista manager gasped, bowing his head as if awaiting judgment. Michael knew the road ahead would be long, tense meetings, reports to review, staff needing comfort and reassurance. But he also knew that even a single fair declaration today would be enough to bring back the light in the eyes of Anna and so many others. In the yellow light, Michael turned his gaze to Anna, She looked at him, tears in her eyes, but a faint smile had formed on her lips. A trembling smile, but as bright as the morning sun piercing the darkness. And Michael knew that smile had returned the trust he once thought he had lost. Morning light streamed through the window, casting honey-colored streaks across the floor of Foster's Brunch Cafe, gentle and warm. The yellow light still shone on every pastry counter, every aromatic latte cup, but this morning something had changed. The atmosphere felt lighter, as if it had finally shed a long-standing burden. At the pastry counter, Anna stood there, no longer a shadow behind the counter. Her cream apron was freshly replaced, crisp with a small name tag pinned to her chest that read, Anna, Shift Supervisor. Her eyes glowed, no longer tired, no longer resigned. Now they shone with the confidence of someone who had dared to stand up for justice, not just for herself, but for every coworker who had quietly shared every drop of sweat. Michael stood still near the bar, counter his eyes following Anna's every move. She was showing a new employee how to operate the POS. Each click, each tap, her eyes shining with determination. The POS was no longer the tool of the cunning. It had become a bridge where every single tip was transparently displayed, properly divided, and given to the right person who had worked for it. He remembered just a few days ago that same girl was the one who stood hunched over, recording every line of stolen tips, every unfair shift, every threatening message from the manager. And today she stood tall, her eyes radiant in Foster's Brunch Cafe, like a testament to the truth. If a single light of justice is kindled, the darkness of injustice has to retreat. Michael smiled as he watched Anna lean forward to offer customers a taste of the new pancake, a smile so confident and warm, her eyes bright, as if the sun had just broken through the clouds. The young barista with light brown hair now stood quietly making coffee, no longer with that haughty gaze. The barista manager bent over his paperwork, his once cold face now stripped of the harshness that had once made every employee fearful. Tips were now distributed transparently. Each click on the pause displayed the employee's name, shift, and tip amount. No more pooling, no more shady dividing. The shift schedule has also been reorganized, ensuring fairness for everyone, so that employees like Anna could work without worrying about going hungry or skipping meals after every shift. Michael walked slowly past each table, his eyes taking in the steaming lattes, the golden pastries, gleaming like the morning sun. He saw each employee working with a more confident smile, their eyes no longer avoiding his. Under the warm yellow light, Foster's Brunch Cafe seemed to have found its true breath again, the breath of sharing fairness and trust. In the final moment, Michael stopped in the middle of the bar. Morning light streamed onto the polished tile floor, shining directly on his face and Anna's fina. She looked up, a radiant smile on her lips, her eyes brimming with tears that sparkled like a crystal. In that moment, Michael heard himself whisper, like a confession, like a promise. One teardrop has changed the whole system. He understood. Sometimes a small change is enough to create a miracle. A click on the pause, a short meeting to share tips, fairly things that seemed small, but had the power to turn an entire rotten system upside down. And he realized he himself had learned a great lesson. Fairness doesn't lie in the cold numbers of a revenue report. It lies in how a CEO, a founder, treats the people whose sweat and tears had built this place. Anna stood in the middle of the pancake counter, her eyes shining with new faith. Her steps were now steadier, her smile brimming with hope, and behind her were colleagues smiling, no more fear, no more resentment. Foster's Brunch Cafe had found itself again. In that yellow light, Michael knew Foster's Brunch Cafe would continue to thrive, not just because of the fragrant pancakes or the rich lattes, but because here, every person would be treated fairly by those who had laid the first bricks, and by every teardrop that had fallen to build this home.